Ma'am, you need to leave this property.
Excuse me? I live here.
The homeowner reported someone's trespassing.
I am the homeowner. This is my house.
The caller said the owner is an elderly white woman. You don't exactly fit that description, do you?
The caller is wrong. I'm Dr. Simone Hartley. I've lived here 12 years.
Doctor, huh? Sure you are.
The June sun was shining bright that Saturday afternoon when Dr. Simone Matthews returned home after an exhausting 14-hour shift at the hospital. She was wearing her blue scrubs with her stethoscope still hanging around her neck and her hospital ID badge clipped to her pocket. All she wanted was to enter her own home, take a shower, and rest. But what happened in the next 20 minutes would be recorded in high definition by the officer's body camera, and that footage would completely destroy his career while making her $2.9 million richer. Before we continue with this absurd story, tell me something. Where are you watching from right now? Leave a comment with your city or country. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, please hit that subscribe button because stories like this need to be told and shared. You won't want to miss what happens when the truth finally comes out. Dr. Simone Matthews was 38 years old and worked as a cardiologist at St. Mary's Hospital, one of the most respected hospitals in the region. She had worked tirelessly for over a decade to get where she was, overcoming barriers that many people can't even imagine. Simone grew up in a poor neighborhood, was the first in her family to go to college, and graduated among the top of her class in medical school. She was the type of person who woke up at 5 a.m. to study before work and stayed late helping patients who couldn't afford to pay. Her colleagues deeply respected her. Her patients loved her and frequently sent thank you letters to the hospital praising her care and dedication. Simone had an impeccable reputation in the medical community, being regularly invited to speak at conferences and train residents. And she had bought that house, her dream home, just 6 months earlier, using all the savings she had accumulated over years of hard work. The house was in a quiet, well-established neighborhood with tree-lined streets and well-maintained properties. It wasn't the kind of place where bad things usually happened. Simone had specifically chosen that neighborhood because she wanted peace and security after years of living in noisy apartments near the hospital. The house itself was modest but beautiful, with a small front garden that she was personally tending to on weekends. She was proud of that place. It was physical proof of all her hard work and sacrifice. On that specific afternoon of June 3rd, 2023, Simone was particularly exhausted. It had been a brutal day at the hospital, with 2 emergency surgeries and several critical patients who needed constant attention. She barely had time to eat or drink water during her shift. When she finally managed to leave, it was past 3 in the afternoon, and all that was on her mind was getting home, taking off those sweaty scrubs and resting for a few hours before having to return on Sunday morning. She drove to her street, parked in the driveway as she always did, grabbed her purse from the passenger seat, and started. Walking toward the front door, her feet ached after standing for so many hours in the operating room. She was mentally making a list of what she would do as soon as she got inside: hot shower, quick meal, maybe watch something light on TV before sleeping. That's when she saw the police car parked on the street, right in front of her property. The officer who stepped out of that car was Greg Thompson, a 42-year-old policeman with 15 years of experience on the force. He had a track record that most people in the department knew about but preferred to ignore. 3 formal complaints in the last 5 years, all involving questionable approaches to black residents in the neighborhood. None of them had resulted in serious disciplinary action because the department always found a way to file away or minimize the complaints. Thompson was the type of officer who saw threats where none existed, especially when those threats had a specific skin color. And on that Saturday afternoon, he was about to make the mistake that would finally put him on the unemployment list. Thompson had received a call minutes earlier from a neighbor on the street. The call was vague, mentioning a suspicious person walking near the houses in the neighborhood. The neighbor didn't give many details, just said there was someone he didn't recognize walking slowly along the sidewalk looking at the properties. For Thompson, that was enough. He didn't ask additional questions about the person's description, didn't request more context, simply assumed something was wrong and decided to investigate personally. When Thompson saw Simone getting out of the car wearing hospital scrubs, something in his mind immediately marked her as suspicious. It didn't matter that she was clearly dressed as a healthcare professional. It didn't matter that she had parked in the driveway as if that were her usual spot. It didn't matter that she was carrying a regular purse and walking casually toward the front door. For Thompson, a black woman in that predominantly white neighborhood was automatically questionable. He activated his body camera and began walking towards Simone. The camera captured every second of what was about to happen, every word, every facial expression, every moment of an interaction that would become viral and destroy a career, while validating the experience of thousands of people who had been through similar situations. Thompson approached with that posture police officers use when they want to intimidate, hand resting near the belt, chest puffed out, hard expression. Simone was about to put the key in the lock when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw the officer approaching quickly. Her heart began to race, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she, like any black person in America, knew that encounters with police could go wrong very quickly. She kept her hands visible, one holding her purse and the other holding her house keys. She didn't make sudden movements. She didn't show aggression. She just stood there, waiting to see what the officer wanted. Thompson began the interrogation immediately. He wanted to know what she was doing there, why she was trying to enter that house, if she had permission to be on that property. The tone was accusatory from the start, as if he had already decided she was guilty of something and was just waiting for her to confess. Simone, still holding her keys, calmly explained that this was her house, that she lived there, that she had just arrived from work at the hospital. She pointed to the badge still clipped to her scrubs, showing her identification. Thompson barely looked at the badge properly. Instead, he became more aggressive, saying he needed to see official identification, that anyone could wear scrubs, that he had received reports of suspicious activity in the area. Simone felt frustration growing inside her, but remained calm. She explained that her driver's license was inside her purse and that she could show it, but asked why she was being questioned for simply entering her own house. This question seemed to irritate Thompson even more. The situation began to escalate quickly. Thompson insisted she was being difficult, that if she really lived there, it wouldn't be a problem to show identification and prove it. He said he had every right to investigate suspicious activities, and that her refusal to cooperate was only making things worse for her. Simone, who had studied her constitutional rights and knew intimidation tactics when she saw them, held her ground. She said she would show identification, but wanted to know specifically what law she had violated to justify this approach. At this point, something interesting happened that the body camera captured perfectly. A neighbor, Mrs. Patricia Morrison, a 67-year-old white woman who lived 3 houses down, was returning from a walk and saw what was happening. Patricia knew Simone well. They talked regularly. Simone had helped Patricia with some medical issues informally, and they had developed a respectful neighborhood friendship. Patricia saw the officer confronting Simone at her own front door and immediately understood what was happening. She quickened her pace towards Simone's property, and what she did next would be crucial to the outcome of this entire incident. Patricia Morrison wasn't the type of person who stayed quiet when she saw injustice happening. She had grown up in the 60s, had participated in civil rights marches in her youth, and even decades later, still firmly believed in standing up for what was right. When she saw Thompson intimidating Simone at her own front door, something inside her ignited. She walked directly up to them, her voice firm and clear, even at 67 years old, and began confronting the officer about what exactly he thought he was doing. Patricia made it very clear that she knew Simone personally, that she was the legitimate owner of that house, that she was a doctor at St. Mary's Hospital, and that there was absolutely no reason for that kind of harassment. She spoke loudly enough that other neighbors began appearing at windows and doors, curious about the commotion that was happening. Patricia's presence completely changed the dynamic of the situation. Thompson could no longer act as if he was dealing with an isolated trespasser without credible witnesses. Thompson tried to dismiss Patricia, saying this was police business and she didn't need to get involved. But Patricia wasn't the type to back down easily. She said that as a neighbor and tax-paying citizen, she had every right to witness the conduct of a public officer on her street. She directly asked Thompson what was the probable cause for him to be interrogating someone who was clearly just trying to enter her own home. The body camera captured every word of this exchange, and it was becoming increasingly obvious that Thompson was losing control of the situation. More neighbors began coming out of their houses, a couple from across the street, a man who was washing his car 2 houses down, a woman who was checking her mailbox. All of them knew Simone. All of them could confirm she lived in that house. And several of them began doing exactly that, calling out from afar that, yes, that was Dr. Matthews' house, that she had lived there. For months, that nothing suspicious was happening. Thompson was now surrounded by multiple witnesses, all contradicting the narrative he was trying to build. Quick question for those watching. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly and decided to intervene? Or have you wished you had? Leave it in the comments. The situation was quickly becoming a public relations nightmare for Thompson. He realized he had made a serious mistake, but instead of backing down gracefully and admitting the error, he doubled down. He insisted he still needed to see official identification from Simone, that the neighbors' testimonies weren't enough, that he was just doing his job. But his tone had changed. It was no longer authoritative and confident. Now there was a touch of desperation, the voice of someone who knew he had gotten himself into something much bigger than he intended. Simone, seeing that she now had multiple witnesses and community support, made a decision. She pulled her wallet from her purse, removed her driver's license, and held it up for Thompson to see clearly. The address on the license matched exactly the house they were standing at. She also showed her medical identification from the hospital, her credit card with her name, and several other documents that proved beyond a shadow of doubt that she was who she said she was and that this was her legal residence. Thompson looked at the documents, and the body camera captured perfectly the expression on his face. It was a mixture of embarrassment, anger, and the growing realization that he had just ruined something important. He didn't apologize immediately. Instead, he tried to save the situation by saying he was just responding to a call that he had to verify, that she should understand he was just doing his job. But no one was buying that excuse, especially not with all those neighbors watching and confirming that the entire approach had been completely unjustified from the beginning. Patricia didn't let it slide. She told Thompson he should have a better explanation than that harassing a respected doctor on her own property wasn't doing his job, it was abuse of power. She mentioned that everything was being recorded by his body camera and that she expected that footage to be preserved and reviewed by his superiors. Thompson began slowly backing toward his patrol car, mumbling something about checking with the dispatcher. But the damage was already done. Every second of that encounter was documented in high-definition video, and soon the entire world would have access to it. Thompson returned to his patrol car but didn't leave immediately. He sat there for several minutes, probably trying to figure out how to report the incident, or perhaps hoping the whole situation would simply disappear. But it wasn't going to disappear. Patricia was already on the phone with someone, and other neighbors were clearly talking among themselves about what they had just witnessed. Simone finally managed to enter her own home, closing the door behind her, but her hands were shaking from adrenaline and frustration. Inside the house, Simone sat on the couch for a long moment, still wearing her hospital scrubs, still processing what had just happened. She wasn't naive about racism. She had experienced microaggressions throughout her career, questioning looks when she entered professional spaces, patients who asked to see a different doctor when they saw her, but being confronted as a criminal at her own front door. A property she had worked so hard to buy was a completely different level of violation. She picked up her phone and started making calls, first to her younger brother Marcus, who was a lawyer specializing in civil rights, then to her best friend, also a doctor, who had been through a similar situation years before, then to the president of the Neighborhood Homeowners Association. Each person she told was outraged, and each one gave the same advice. Document everything, officially request the body camera footage, and don't let this go unnoticed. Patricia Morrison, meanwhile, wasn't wasting time. She had filmed part of the interaction with her own cell phone, capturing the final moments when more neighbors had gathered. She posted the video in a neighborhood Facebook group with a detailed description of what she had witnessed, naming Dr. Simone Matthews as a respected neighbor and valuable community member who had been harassed without reason. The post began receiving comments and shares immediately. By Sunday morning, the story had spread far beyond the neighborhood Facebook group. Someone had shared Patricia's video in a larger community activism group. From there, it went to Twitter, then Instagram, then TikTok. Within 24 hours, thousands of people were watching those final minutes of the confrontation and sharing their own similar experiences. Hashtags began emerging and gaining momentum. Simone's name was becoming known, although she had never asked for this attention. The police department began receiving calls on Sunday afternoon. Concerned citizens wanting to know if it was true that one of their officers had harassed a doctor at her own home. Local reporters began investigating the story. On Monday morning, when Simone returned to the hospital for her shift, She was greeted with supportive hugs from colleagues who had seen the story online. The hospital director sought her out personally to offer any assistance she needed, including legal support through the hospital's attorneys. Marcus, Simone's brother, wasted no time in acting officially. He filed a formal complaint against Thompson with the police department and immediately requested the complete body camera footage through a formal public records request. He knew departments had a habit of making evidence disappear or claiming body cameras mysteriously weren't working, so he was strategic. He copied multiple civil rights organizations on the request, ensuring many eyes were on the case. The pressure on the police department increased dramatically when local news channels began covering the story. Reporters appeared at Simone's house asking for interviews. She initially refused, still processing everything and not wanting to become a public face. But Marcus convinced her that telling her story publicly was important, not just for her, but for all the other people who went through similar situations without witnesses, without videos, without resources to fight back. So, Simone agreed to do an interview with a respected local reporter who had covered social justice issues for years. Simone's interview aired on Tuesday night and became the week's most watched segment for that station. She spoke calmly, but with clear emotion in her voice, about how it felt to be treated like a criminal on her own property. She explained that she had worked double shifts to save money to buy that house, that she had specifically chosen that neighborhood because it seemed safe and welcoming, and that now she no longer felt safe in her own home. The interview ended with her asking a simple but powerful question. How many other people does this happen to, without cameras, without witnesses, without justice? The police department was forced to respond publicly. They issued a statement saying they were taking the allegations seriously and that an internal investigation had been opened. Thompson was placed on administrative leave while the investigation was ongoing, which meant he was still receiving his full salary while sitting at home. This further angered the community, which began showing up at city council meetings demanding real action, not just investigations that typically led nowhere. The complete body camera footage was finally released after intense legal pressure from Marcus and the civil rights organizations he had involved. When the full video became public, it was even worse than Patricia's clip had shown. The recording showed Thompson approaching Simone with immediate suspicion, without any reasonable justification. It showed him completely ignoring her hospital badge. It showed him becoming increasingly aggressive even as she remained calm and cooperative. And crucially, it showed there was absolutely no legal basis for the entire approach. Legal experts began appearing on news programs analyzing the video. Constitutional law professors pointed out multiple violations of Simone's rights. Former police officers, including some who usually defended their colleagues, admitted Thompson had crossed several lines. The consensus was universal. This wasn't appropriate policing. It was harassment based on racial prejudice. The footage became a case study on how not to approach citizens and what happens when officers allow personal biases to dictate their actions. The department's internal investigation lasted 3 weeks, but everyone already knew what the outcome would be. The video was too clear, the witnesses were too consistent, and the public pressure was too great for the department to simply file the case away as they usually did. The investigation report concluded that Thompson had violated multiple departmental policies, including improper approach, lack of probable cause, and conduct that brought discredit to the department. The recommendation was immediate termination. Thompson tried to fight the termination through the police union. His lawyer argued he was just responding to a citizen's call, that he had the right to investigate suspicious activity, and that the decision to fire him was an overreaction to media pressure. But the department held firm on its decision. They knew that keeping Thompson would mean opening themselves up to a massive lawsuit, not just from Simone, but potentially from other people he had approached similarly over the years. And the video made it impossible to defend his actions. Marcus, meanwhile, was building a federal case against Thompson and the department. The legal complaint was extensive, citing Fourth Amendment rights violations against illegal searches and seizures, civil rights violations under federal law, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and the department's failure to properly train and supervise its officers. The lawsuit also mentioned previous complaints against Thompson that had been ignored, arguing that the department knew he was a problem, but chose to do nothing until it became a public scandal. The case didn't go to trial. 2 months after the incident, with Thompson already officially fired and his police certification revoked, the city's lawyers approached Marcus with a settlement proposal. Negotiations lasted several weeks, with back and forth about amounts and terms. The city wanted a confidentiality agreement. They wanted Simone to never speak publicly about the case again. Marcus categorically refused. Simone wasn't just after money. She wanted the story to remain public as a warning and an example of accountability. The final settlement was announced at a joint press conference. The city agreed to pay Simone $2.9 million in damages, an amount that sent shockwaves through the local police community and beyond. But the money was only part of the agreement. Marcus had negotiated additional terms that were perhaps even more important in the long run. The police department was required to implement mandatory and extensive training on racial bias for all officers. Not just a 1-hour video they could sleep through, but hands-on workshops conducted by external civil rights experts. The agreement also required the department to establish an early warning system to identify officers with patterns of complaints, particularly those related to racially motivated approaches. Thompson had 3 previous complaints that had been essentially ignored. If this system had existed and been taken seriously, he probably would have been taken off the streets long before he encountered Simone that June day. The department was also required to create a civilian review board composed of community members who would have real power to review cases of police misconduct, not just an advisory committee that could be ignored. There was more. The settlement stipulated that all body cameras must be functioning and recording during any interaction with the public, with no exceptions. Officers who turned off their cameras or claimed malfunctions would face severe penalties. The footage would have to be preserved for longer periods and be more easily accessible through public records requests. Essentially, the agreement created a level of transparency and accountability that the department had never had before. Simone used part of the settlement money to establish a foundation focused on providing free legal assistance to people of color facing police misconduct, but lacking resources to fight. She called it the Justice at the Door Foundation, a direct reference to what had happened to her. The foundation began receiving dozens of requests for help in its first weeks, proving how widespread this problem was. Simone also began speaking publicly at community events, universities, and conferences about racial bias in policing. Thompson never worked as a police officer again. With his certification revoked and the viral video following him across the internet, no department would touch him. He tried to get private security jobs, but most companies did online searches and found the story immediately. The last public information about him suggested he had moved to another state, possibly trying to start over where people didn't know his face or name. Some people felt sorry for him, saying one mistake shouldn't ruin an entire life. But others pointed out it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice based on prejudice, and that he only faced consequences because he was caught on camera with multiple witnesses. Simone's story became a reference point in discussions about policing, racism, and accountability. The body camera video was used in police academies across the country as an example of what not to do. Law students studied the case in civil rights classes. Activists pointed to it as proof that justice was possible when communities came together and demanded accountability. But Simone always made clear in her talks that her case was the exception, not the rule. She had witnesses, she had everything recorded, she had financial resources through her lawyer brother, she had a community that mobilized. Most victims of police misconduct didn't have any of these advantages. 2 years after the incident, Simone still lived in the same house. She thought about moving initially. The memory of that day had tainted the place for her. But then she realized that moving would be letting racism win. That was her home, bought with her hard work, and she wasn't going to let one person's prejudice drive her out. She continued waving to Patricia Morrison, who still walked down the street regularly. She continued being an active neighbor and contributing community member, and she continued being an excellent cardiologist, saving lives at the same hospital where she worked when it all happened. The legacy of the case, Simone Matthews versus City, and Officer Thompson extended far beyond the $2.9 million settlement. It forced uncomfortable conversations about how racial bias manifests in everyday police work. It showed that body cameras are only useful if the footage is actually reviewed and taken seriously when it shows misconduct. It proved that communities could demand real change when they came together, and it gave hope to countless other people who had experienced similar treatment but thought they would never see justice. The case didn't solve systemic racism in policing, but it was an important victory in a much longer fight. And for Simone, it was validation that standing firm, knowing your rights, and refusing to accept injustice could make a difference. Not just for her, but for everyone who would come after.